Hello and welcome to the Center for the Study of Organized Hate's panel discussion on what Pakistan's forced expulsion means for Afghan refugees. My name is Naila Mohammed. I'm the Director of Research for Pakistan and Afghanistan at the Center. Before we begin the event, I'd like to let everyone know that this event is being recorded. Now, nearly 3 million Afghan nationals, including refugees, asylum seekers, and long-term residents, now face the threat of mass deportation from Pakistan, following Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's October announcement of a three-phase initiative under the government's Illegal Foreigners Repatriation Plan. This sweeping policy aims to expel Afghan refugees, regardless of their legal status or length of stay, and forcibly return them to Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. The crackdown has intensified in recent months, affecting those Afghans currently in the process of resettling in the United States, Canada, the UK, and other European countries. Many had fled Afghanistan after the Taliban takeover in 2021, while others have lived in Pakistan for decades. Some were even born there, have married into local communities, and know no other home or language. According to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Afghans in Pakistan routinely face discrimination, limited access to formal education, employment, or buying property, and lack of legal protections, conditions that already render their lives precarious. Pakistan has now declared that once deported, Afghans will not be permitted to return, raising serious concerns for individuals and families who have spent decades, if not generations, or their entire lives building in that country. Today, our discussion will delve into humanitarian, legal, and geopolitical consequences of this forced repatriation policy that Pakistan's initiated. We have the pleasure of having Dr. Syed Irfan Ashraf with us and Dr. Iftikhar Firdos as our guest speakers. Dr. Irfan Ashraf holds a PhD in mass communications and is currently an assistant professor at the University of Pakistan in Pakistan, I apologize. He began his career in journalism, working for various publications, including Dawn News, where he covered the war on terror. He also served as a fixer for foreign news networks, including the New York Times. In 2011, he availed the prestigious SUSI exchange program in the United States, and the next year he left for his PhD at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. In 2014, he received the Mira Award for his media criticism. His book is published in many foreign and national research journals. His work, and in 2022, he published his book entitled The Dark Side of Journalism. Iftikhar Firdos is a journalist, author, and researcher from Peshawar, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. He holds a doctoral degree in psycholinguistics. He has been an editor for two major media outlets of Pakistan and specializes in the studies of terrorist ideologies, belief systems. He is the founder and editor of the Khorasan Diary, a digital platform that focuses on conflict, migration, and political economy. Welcome to the both of you. Apologies for any tongue ties on my behalf. And we'll start with opening remarks with Irfan and then move over to Iftikhar. Irfan, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having me. And for those friends who don't know much about the demography and geography of Pakistan, first of all, Pakistan has a total of 4 provinces, in which 2 provinces, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan, they share border with Afghanistan. So in these 2 provinces, there are about 6 major border crossings, though border crossing are around 17 or 18, but 6 are major, which are being used for the forced repatriations of Afghans. Most of these Afghan refugees often use either the Chaman border crossing, which is in Balochistan, or they use the Torkham border crossing, which is in Pakhtunkhwa. I personally live in Peshawar, which is the main city of Pakhtunkhwa, and which is around 40 kilometers from the Torkham border crossing. I have been closely observing the main route to Torkham, which is also called GT Road or Silk Route in the old days. So in December 2023, when this current phase of forced deportation of Afghan refugees was first announced, the situation ever since has gradually became quite harsh. 3 months ago, I personally read the newspapers, and there was a lot of like hype through social media that the way Afghan families were being forced or treated in Punjab provinces or in Sindh, which are the other two provinces. These refugees were kept in detention centers where women and children were treated badly, often thrown into police vans before sending them away to the border crossings. At present, though the situation seems relatively calm, I visited Torkham border twice in the past 2 weeks and saw that the two registration camps, which are set up for the repatriation, look deserted. This could be possibly because of the recent tension between Pakistan and India on the eastern border of the country, which may have shifted the focus of the Pakistani government away from the deportations. Still, officials told me that about 1 million refugees have been deported in the past couple of years. And of those, nearly 500,000 were sent back through Torkham alone, which means the rest of the data is scattered on the other borders. So because of this tense situation, there is a widespread fear and anxiety among thousands of Afghans who are still living in Pakistan, both legally and illegally. Among them, those who fled Afghanistan in August 2021, when the Taliban took over Kabul for the second time, these refugees really are very scared. We must know that most of them are professional people. Some of them are journalists, and others are those translators who have worked with the US-led NATO forces before the Taliban coming into power. One of them visited me even today to my office. He said that if they go back, they fear he will be punished by the Taliban for his alleged support to the previous Ghani government. In this situation, international community is obviously the only support base for these Afghans. However, to this point, the community hardly seems very active. I'm again thankful to all of you who are here at least to participate in this event, and I hope that this event itself would contribute to this very humanitarian cause, which is a huge challenge before us.
Thank you, Irfan. Iftikhar, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Naila. I'll pick up from a point that Irfan Saab actually made in relation to how refugees are viewed, because he said that the two camps that were established, they remain totally empty. And that's because one of the major reasons, obviously, is because of the Pakistan-India tensions. But secondly, even before that, we'd seen the numbers of forced deportations or even voluntary deportations going down drastically. And one of the major reasons for that was that Islamabad, who until now had a very tumultuous relation with the Afghan Taliban when they came in power, had in recent weeks re-established some connections with the Kandahar circles. And the particular request that actually came in from the Afghan side was that the repatriation process should be concentrated, because the large number of refugees that were coming in, the Afghan government currently did not have the resources to facilitate. And secondly, with such large numbers, they did not have the required residential complexes to actually hold these people, and they would have to stay, in some sorts of camps on the other side. So we've seen about 3 townships now inaugurated by the Afghan Taliban to help those resettle. And we also have seen messaging from the Afghan Taliban to the Pakistanis that they do want the people to return to Afghanistan. And that actually brings us to a point in terms of which I believe was my point of discussion for this particular paper, this particular discussion, sorry, that refugees have always been used as, strategical tools wielded by regional and global actors to serve geopolitical ends. And throughout the 4 decades since the invasion of Afghanistan since 1979, there have been at least 5 major trends of displacement that we've witnessed so far. And they were accompanied, like in terms of whenever that displacement has taken place, they are usually caused by major shifts in the country's political landscape. Refugees have been welcomed, they have been repelled or instrumentalized, depending on the strategic calculus at that particular time of host countries and the international community. However, the fall of Kabul in August 2021, marking the return of the Taliban, was not merely a flashpoint within Afghanistan's domestic affairs. It also is a trigger, rather a paradigmatic seismic shift in refugee policies across the region as well. And these reverberations are not just local; they extend far beyond, South and Central Asia. In August 2021, we see as one of those, moments which are defining moments uh, in terms of how refugees will be observed for the next couple of years. And it also does not only just serve as a marker of American withdrawal or the resurgence of the Taliban, but it also shows, a lot of uh, thought process for the strategic miscalculations as well as the exposed assumptions for the countries that have hosted these refugees, with particular reference to Pakistan. So for decades, Pakistan has maintained an often complex and contradictory relationship with the Afghan Taliban, and also in terms of its refugee population as well. There have been several nomenclatures over the years that have actually been brought to the forefront, depending on what wave of Afghan refugee population that we are talking to in terms of the historical timeline, while positioning itself as a key player in facilitating and negotiating counterterrorism efforts. Pakistan, has been accused of harboring the Taliban, which obviously at some relation, at some point is true as well. But it has also attracted, the return, cashing the return in terms of keeping these Afghan refugees with itself, which over the years has somewhat, leveraged down. But it's not just Pakistan alone. I mean, they've been backed by Western powers, particularly the United States. Yet, with the Taliban's return to power, Islamabad's expectations and its strategic patience that they've actually called now, simulating the term or displacing the term strategic depth. You know, that has sort of like moved into a very different shift. And we've seen that the deteriorating relationship with the Afghan Taliban, with particular reference to the TTP, we've seen that relationship vis-a-vis affecting the how the Afghan population is viewed inside Pakistan. And crystallization of this actually, which has ball this entire refugee spectrum in terms of how we think that this is now a process of enforced repatriation, is actually on 31st January 2023, when a bombing took place, the first ever in Peshawar's main police lines, which is the police headquarters within the city. And we saw the Director General for the Inter-Service Intelligence and the Defense Minister going to Afghanistan and telling them that this problem is now surpassed their patience. So there were three decisions that were made at that time. First was to, if the TTP problem or the security dynamics or the security understanding between both these countries is not rationalized with Pakistan's perspective, there'll be a sort of a what we call a stringent measure within the border, within the visa regime. And then secondly, there will be the lessening of the diplomatic footprint. And then lastly, it would be, you know, um, the refugees. And we saw that when terrorism spiked in 2024, and also in the beginning of this year, um, there have been, as Irfan has mentioned, a million, about 700,000 in the first phase, and about 250,000, in the second phase. But now that process has stopped, as we mentioned in the beginning of the talk as well, because of an understanding between Kabul and Islamabad. But it's important to denote, and this is a question that the Pakistani establishment always puts forward, is that this paradigmatic shift in terms of the refugee crisis is not unique to Pakistan. Iran also hosts millions of refugees, and we've seen that about 2 million of them would be repatriated to Afghanistan, but we never see that noise being made from within Afghanistan or other spaces that they have been actually relentlessly taken out and shifted back to Afghanistan. And also for the larger number of people who were provided visas or some kind of documentations to enter Pakistan's space, after the 2021 crisis, for offering them, visas as well as trying to pull them out. A lot of that has now been put into the back burner. So even European countries as well as the United States, their promises of resettlement have obviously failed to establish a comprehensive or consistent refugee response that we've seen so far. So the global trend has leaned towards fortifying borders, bureaucratizing asylum processes, and framing refugees as risks rather than responsibilities. And we've seen that because of the heightened security measures as well as security incidents taking place in Europe, and most recently the Islamic State phenomenon, which again has been traced back to Afghanistan. So I think I've had little time. There's a lot to discuss, but there are two important points that I want to make over here. Then is that this entire refugee ecosystem is actually has two components attached to it. One is the economic counterbalance that it creates whenever it is resumed or stopped or reshaped in one place, because this refugee crisis has created its own economy. Some of it is accounted for on both sides of the border, and some of it is not accounted. And then the second part is viewing refugees within a security lens, whether Islamabad's decision of sending back Afghans back to a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan is a wise decision or not, or whether this will serve as more recruitment grounds for globally recognized terrorist entities and come back to not just haunt Pakistan, but the region itself. And these are questions that we look forward to being asked and answered in more details. Thank you, Naina.
Thank you so much, Iftikhar. We do have, I have opening questions for you, but the panel discussion is open to those who'd like to pose questions. Please post them and we will answer those questions as well online. There are lots of questions that come to my head for both Irfan and for Iftikhar. And I guess one that's...
Naila, or you want to open it? If you want me, I can add a few points, but if you want to open the discussion, so I'm okay with that.
If you'd like to add some points, you're more than welcome to. I wanted to open up with some questions that I had for you.
Yeah, coming to Iftikhar Firdaus, he gives some details which are very important. Keeping in mind for those who don't know much about Afghanistan, that is a landlocked country with 45 million population. So the resources of a country can only sustain half of the population. And keep in mind that for the last 40, 50 years, there is a war going on there. And the last leg of the war, which we call the war on terror, was very devastating. So the infrastructure is almost entirely dismantled and the source of income is really low, which means $2 per day per person. Only perishable agriculture products and fresh fruits are counted as a produce. And those also depends upon the opening or closure of the borders with Pakistan. So therefore, it means that if these refugees go back, so the question will be that what they will do. My hunch is that, and this is a major implication, which connects with what Iftikhar said, is that it will contribute to militancy because of the deplorable economic situation. And I think that some of them would be left with no alternative but to join militancy or go for poppy cultivation. Keep in mind that this is a black economy in that region, and it is thriving ever since 1980s when the US and Pakistan started proxy war in this region in the name of Afghan jihad against the Soviets. So before 1980s, there was a golden triangle, a term which was used for the narco trade from Thailand, Burma, and Laos. And after 1980s, it's called Golden Crescent, which stands for the black economy of worth $19 billion or more than that. I'm quoting the figures which were quoted in UN and many other international journals. So it is spread between Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iran, this Golden Crescent. So these refugees going back will be an easy recruit, I fear, for such rogue elements, keeping in view that Afghanistan is a stateless country and the Taliban is only an interim setup. So this repatriation will add to the cross-border violent labor market, spreading this black economy even further to finance militancy in the border region. Just wanted to share these two important things, that my hunch is that sending them back is directly handing them over to those rogue elements who are already operating this black economy in this entire region.
That's a really good point, Irfan. Thank you for bringing that up. And yes, I mean, there are lots of questions in my mind and everyone's mind, I'm sure, about what is to happen for these individuals who are forced to go back, especially women, who will be put in a situation where they're going to be faced with severe restrictions, freedom of movement, access to education, access to employment, access to healthcare. What does their future look like, women who are repatriated? What do you think will happen with them? And I'm throwing this question at either Irfan or Iftikhar. Either one of you, please feel free to answer this.
Yeah, I don't know what will Firdaus say about it, but I have one because there is one answer. There is in the Q&A section, there is one question. Can we create a new country or dedicated autonomous zone for refugees instead of seeking refuge to hostile and unfriendly countries of the world? So this was the question, which is I'm most of the time thinking that, and there is one military interpretation, and then there is another, my own interpretation that. One military interpretation is that once I was talking on the cross border, like there was a Pakistani military official, and he asked me what we should do with these refugees. Why not the NATO forces, if they want a solution for the Afghan problem? There are around 48 of them, and the Afghan's population is around like 41 or 42 million. Why not they should take 1 million each country and take them back? So the question would be that what should we do with Afghanistan as a country if we want to do away with the population of Afghanistan? I think that those people who are looking into Afghanistan just as a geostrategic corridor, they don't think that Afghanistan is a country. They don't think that Afghan people have the right to live peacefully on their own land. For them, ever since the last 3,000-4,000 years, ever since Alexander came and after them many other came, they want this land to behave like a geostrategic land, and they should support these imperialist powers. As far as I am concerned, who lives in this part of the world, I think that international community and the world forums, they have a huge responsibility. So for all those powers from the West or the most of the European countries, they have taken interest into this land, but mostly for very wrong reason. That was wars. I think we should give a chance to develop this region, at least in some possible ways, and look away from the American interest in this region or from the Western interest in this region. Whenever there is a chance to promote peace in this region, or wherever the people themselves comes up to carve out a future for themselves, we find out that some kind of influence from the outside is coming. For example, this time, Trump all the time saying we need Bagram. So when Trump says that we need Bagram, so here China comes in, and here we as people feel very helpless, because then our voice gets like dumped. We ourselves can't believe that when we can make any difference when come in between these two superpowers. And that is how my state behaved as well, as if we are nothing. The people who are living in this cross-border region are helpless. They can't find themselves evolving into the image of the geostrategic global powers. So then they lose confidence in their own efforts. And this is one of the major reasons I think we should stand on each other as civilian, as civil society, as a global community, and work together against those geostrategic powers which are trying to create this land into a geostrategic corridor instead of a land which could house its own people who are living here for thousands of years.
Thank you for the answer to the question. I'll go back to the initial question that I had. What does life look like for minorities like women who are going to be going back to Afghanistan and face severe restrictions? Iftikhar, do you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in terms of women, because we have a lot of colleagues, relatives as well, who are, because I am from the tribal areas. And so we have relatives on both sides of the border. A lot of them were living in Peshawar, and then they were living in Islamabad as well. And these are the more urban Afghan population that were there in Afghanistan for the last 2 decades. A large chunk of this population was born with NATO and ISAF troop stations. So they know a very different Afghanistan from what it is right now. And then for my age group, for the people that surrounded us and for the larger chunk of Afghan refugees that lived in the similar areas that we lived, they actually don't know anything about Afghanistan because they called Pakistan their home. So we're dealing with two distinct kind of populations. One is who call Pakistan home and now will no longer be able to call it home. And then the second is who were born in Afghanistan but now remain a displaced community with lost identities. And when we talk about women, in the initial days, everybody tried to escape from Afghanistan into Pakistan. And so the chunk of it, and if you look at the UNODC's data, UNHCR's data, and even data that we managed to get from Pakistani authorities at both Chaman and Torkham and even the other four minor crossing points, about 76% of that data actually shows that it was women and children who crossed over into Pakistan. So the larger chunk of this population will always be women and children. And if you look at the data that has been crunched now of those that have been those who voluntarily left Pakistan, fearing some kind of straight restrictions or being jailed or kept in custody or being questioned, or those who were forcefully repatriated. If you look at that, the larger chunk of that is also women and children. But interestingly, Naila, even when in the previous wave of uh, you know, repatriation. We saw immediately after August 2021, when a larger chunk of Afghans came to Pakistan, we saw them going back to Pakistan, going back to Afghanistan. And at this point also, we see a large number of voluntary repatriation, contrary to what the public thinks, because Pakistan itself is in a huge economic mess. And so it has not been able to offer the kind of opportunities that people require, apart from the dream that they would be able to move to a third country. So a very large chunk of population that still remains in most urban Pakistan is actually the one who wants to move to a third country. And everybody's trying for that. For your question in relation to particularly women, I can tell you that a lot of them actually returned to Afghanistan because in its initial days, the Taliban phenomenon, the governance system, it did not show the kind of restrictive movements against women or the more, old-fashioned rule since the 1990s of what the Taliban was famous for. But in the last year and a half, when they have returned, we've seen that the crackdown against foreign non-governmental organizations that made the chunk of the job market, as well as some professional schooling, um, that has totally ended. And so it's a devastating scenario for any woman to be in Afghanistan who thinks that she needs to be educated, there needs to be some kind of progression. And literally the only thing that they look now to forward to, and I can tell you that with great veracity, is for some kind of hope that they can actually leave Afghanistan and go back. And that's why one of the markets that have recently opened it up, or has opened up in Afghanistan, is the marriage market to global citizens. And that's also something that's taking place. And the next thing that we'll hear is how Afghan women were exploited somewhere in the West or some other countries as well. So it's a continuous tautological circle of crushing a generation. And if you, and I agree with Irfan as well as the larger geopolitical strategic games or shifts or alliances that have now been created vis-a-vis Afghanistan, I do not see much hope in that. And I'm sorry to say that because we do not see the kind of changes that are required within the system even for the next 5 years, because there is no alternative to the Afghan Taliban. And so the Western powers as well as its neighbors are very comfortable in doing business as long as the Taliban adhere to a certain bare minimum on what is considered to be a governance system. Whatever happens inside Afghanistan, I don't think anybody is any longer majorly concerned about it vis-a-vis when newer conflicts such as the Ukraine conflict and the Gaza conflict has actually overshadowed Afghanistan in totality now. So I don't see any replacement any soon to that governance system. And I don't see any organic movement also that has the capacity any longer within Afghanistan that can actually come up with a political change. there is only one hope that the Afghan people might be able to have, is that these larger chunks of population, when they move in, they recalibrate and try and bring in a resistance movement from within. That could be only a future hope. But I don't think that in the near future, any foreign government, whether it's in the neighborhood of Afghanistan or whether it's seven seas across, has the appetite to actually indulge into Afghanistan in ways which it can make difference to the lives of refugees or people of Afghanistan.
I may add one thing to it, if you allow me now.
Sure.
Okay. Normally, Afghanistan is being called as a graveyard of the empires. I think that we need to understand Afghanistan as a graveyard of the resistant movements, particularly from the women. It's a graveyard for women. Why I'm saying, if somebody has any doubt, they should read the history of RAWA, which is the Revolutionary Association of the Afghan Women. How many of them were killed in Pakistan? Some of them were like acid were thrown in their faces. They were the most revolutionary people of Afghanistan. So far, I have been reading a whole lot about Afghanistan. Their viewpoint is the only viewpoint which clicks with me, which challenges my patriarchy, and which show me some way out of what is happening in Afghanistan. I can just share with you one story. A few days back, not a few days, couple of months back, I was in Torkham border. I was doing a story there, and I came across one old man. He was around 70 years old. And somebody told me you should record his story. And when I reached here, so he said he's there for 7-8 days, waiting for her daughter to see her because her husband has died and there is no one to take care of her. And she was just in Jalalabad, which means 5-6 miles away. But because of the border crossing that was closed, he couldn't visit over there. And 70-year-old man. And look and behold where he came from. He came from Nawagai, which is another border crossing on Afghanistan border. But because that border crossing is almost permanently closed, he's a tribal man. He came to Peshawar, means 40-50 kilometers. And from Peshawar, he came 30-40 kilometers to another border crossing where he was waiting and lying over there without any money and with no help. Hundreds and thousands of women on both sides are married in each other, and they are the strong bond so far for centuries in between both these two countries. But because of the border fencing, this entire population has been displaced, sort of, because these places are not worth living anymore, the way my colleague Iftikhar mentioned. So if there is no economy, people either have to leave or they should stay over there on $1 or $2 per day per person. I think this is not a kind of life. The brunt of this life is being borne by women and children who are nowhere in sight. They are not in scene. Even in our metaphors, they don't exist anymore. So when we say graveyard of empire, I think we need to stop such kind of people and tell them it's a graveyard of women which empire has created in order to topple some voices which are very important, voices like Rawa and many other resistance voices.
Thank you. I do feel that Pakistan owns some sort of responsibility in this as well. There are other nationalities living in Pakistan. There's a lot of Chinese nationals, Iranian nationals, there are Burmese nationals, not to such an extent, not in such big numbers, but why this emphasis on Afghan refugees and the repatriation of Afghan refugees, and why this villainization of Afghans as criminals or terrorists? What is this hyperfixation that the establishment has with Afghan refugees? What is behind this? I'm throwing the question out at any one of you.
So,
please feel free.
I mean, just for a counter check in terms of statistics, and I don't know whether how organic that is, but statistically, in terms of deportation, when Pakistan initially began this process, it was said to be against Afghan refugees, and then because of the international backlash, we saw the press conference in which this announcement was made redone, and it said it was against all nationalities, all illegal foreigners living in Pakistan. And statistically, there were like 16 Africans, mostly from Nigeria and Somalia, that were deported. And I think there was one Chinese somewhere in Kohart jail who had overstayed his visa. And he was also, by road taken to the Xinjiang border, with Gilgit-Baltistan and repatriated from there. So the optics of it were very different in terms of how it actually seems to be. But then again, there is less denial in terms of, villainization of the Afghan refugees. And I personally think that has been considered to be viewed from a different lens at every given time, as I've even explained previously. And historical, or chronological representation of how Afghan refugees have been viewed within Pakistan, I think that is an academic work that needs to be there, and it will take a long time even if we start discussing it. But post 2021, and even with previous resonances from 2014 onwards, we do see that they have been villainized in terms of uh, being used for the illegal transaction of terrorist networks. That's the first part. And then secondly, also directly involved within terrorism in Pakistan. In 2000, from 2014 and 16, there's hardly any data to actually back up, because there's hardly any FIRs that we can find in core area, conflict areas such as the south of KP or Khyber Pakhtunkhwa or the tribal areas, and even as far as Balochistan. But from 2021, since the Taliban actually took over, there has been hard evidence of Afghan nationals that have been involved. Uh, Now, whether you can view an entire community from a lens of an action of a certain people, I don't necessarily agree with that. But that argument has been used to extrapolate, to sort of make the entire community to be viewed as a system of governance controlled from Afghanistan, that they are anti-Pakistan in many different ways. And that's the villainization part. How that should be undone, that again will be what sort of political networking takes place between the Taliban government and Pakistan, and the status of refugees ultimately is a political question rather than a humanitarian one.
I think I would also add to it, if you allow me. While I agree with Firdaus, my point is very different than him. It's very systemic. And I personally think that post-colonial states are racist states, the way colonialism was a racist infrastructure in colonial times. Pashtuns in this cross-border region, which is now called Afpak region, people in this region were called like martial race, all entire Pashtun, but particularly they were the strong, they were the people who were sent in fighting colonial wars. When Pakistan came into being, even now, Pashtuns are being treated as bodies. They are not treated as minds. The state don't expect them to say something which is of their own narrative. So whenever there is an independent narrative, the state then reacts to it. And this is what we have found out during the Afghan war, when this entire refugee phenomena started and they were politicized. These 400 camps were made in the cross-border region, which is now called the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa side. So these refugees were connected to the Russian caste system, and they were sent back to Afghanistan to fight in the form of these 7 political parties in order to defeat the Soviets. So see, they were only war fodder. They could not think beyond than that. What is the problem that when the Taliban emerged, Pakistan still expected them not to go beyond that, because Taliban are Pakistan's strategic partners. There may be some tactical issues between Pakistan and Afghanistan and Taliban, but basically strategically Pakistan don't expect anybody or cannot tolerate any nationalist government in Afghanistan. So Taliban are the best. Now the problem emerged when most of these Pashtuns, particularly Afghans who are being repatriated now, when they were here in Pakistan, they don't accept Taliban. So it is a problem for Pakistan as well. So then I think they are not of any help to Pakistan in that way. Taliban is basically a militant force. That is not a political force in that way. Pashtuns mostly, and particularly those Afghans who are in Pakistan right now, they don't want to go back and reinforce the Taliban system over there. And that is one major reason, I think, that in the long term, Pakistan will not tolerate these people anymore in this, and they would be pushed back so that to somehow contribute to the Taliban but this is my own hunch. I think this is inherent racism in the structure of the state, and it is very much revealed when the state say our action of repatriation is against all refugees, but this action is only limited to Afghans. It shows this very racism which is embedded in the state structure since the colonial times, that Pashtuns can only fight for the state, cannot fight against the state. If it is fighting against the state, it can reinforce the state, but it cannot find another, they cannot carve out any third role which is related to mine, which is related to any other thing other than war. So I think maybe this is also one reason which is there.
That's a possibility, but there's something that comes to mind. You mentioned economic crisis as well, of both of you did, as far as going back. But wouldn't it be economically wise for Pakistan to be able to incorporate Afghan refugees? Wouldn't it have helped the economy in the long run if Afghan refugees, for example, had access to buy property, be able to get bank accounts, be able to get access to formal employment, access to education the same way as, because obviously that's an issue. If for the past 40 years they had those accesses, similar to immigrants in America or immigrants in the UK, you're able to, make your way through life because you have access to these facilities. Don't you think that would have been beneficial to the economy of Pakistan? Because if you look at it, there's a lot of Chinese foreign nationals who have purchased properties or have bank accounts in Pakistan. How come that same isn't afforded to Afghan refugees?
If you ask me, so my hunch is coming from this point, which you already mentioned. My political views is largely being carved out because of this very problem. If Pakistan really wants to send these refugees back and take it as a humanitarian issue instead of a political issue, then Pakistan should also open these border crossing in Balochistan and in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Keep in mind that this was called a Silk Route. And for centuries, the entire countries were living on this Silk Route. At least Pashtuns who were living in this gateway, in this cross-border region, they were living on this route. And even now, this route is very much an economic corridor, and it can sustain 2 out of the 4 total provinces of Pakistan, which means Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. But the problem is that whenever there is a chance of stability, Pakistan still continue in war. It's understandable that routes would be closed. But even if there is a stability, Pakistan chooses to close these routes. And this we have been observing in the last around 3.5 years, ever since the Taliban have come. We were expecting that even if Taliban are not a choice for a liberal or for progressive or for nationalist Pashtun, we were happy that at least if there is some stability, these routes will be opened, and on both sides of the divide, Pashtuns will be having a very honorable livelihood, a traditional form of livelihood. If the state is not giving anything, at least we can sustain our lives. Keep this in mind, in the last 3 years, for 80% of the time, all these routes are being closed. We don't see any reason other than the political reason, which we already mentioned: racist state, lack of political representation of the Pashtuns in Kabul or in Islamabad. And keep in mind, when I say in Kabul, somebody may say, while Taliban are Pashtuns, I don't accept them as Pashtuns. They are still behaving like the proxies of strategic proxies of Pakistan. In Islamabad, we don't have any Pashtun influence which could help the state know that opening these border crossing would also not only help these refugees to find honorable livelihood, but also those cross-border Pashtuns who don't have any livelihood here and who are up in arms, not up in arms, but they are resisting the state in the form of PTM, in the form of other Pashtun resistance groups, because they also have the same plea that the state should shun away its racist approach in dealing with Pashtun and should give some kind of political voice, and it should listen to it and open these doors so that there could be an economic activity. I think this is a very viable option, and repatriation policies could be successful if Pakistan open these routes as well. So there will be livelihood, and nobody would be preferring here to stay. They would go back to their own countries.
So I'll just throw in a little bit of a, fact check in terms of, because the term racial has been used in particular reference to Pashtun identity. So the larger chunk of Pashtun populations that made it into Pakistan is between the 1980s and then in 2007. And that's where, till 2007, and that's where we see the POR cards being introduced. So the Pashtun population, which makes the major chunk of the POR, are exempted from the repatriation plan as of now. That's the first part. The second thing is statistically.
Are they exempted? I'm sorry. Are they exempted because of the current policy by the chief minister saying that they will not be repatriated in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, or are they exempt in general? Are you saying?
They're exempted throughout Pakistan, so the POR card holders are exempted from the repatriation part.
That's different to what Shahbaz Sharif is saying, and this is news to me.
Yeah, so this is after they announced the repatriation part, is that the POR cards were exempted from it. And they will be getting most probably another extension after July for another 3 months. And that involves the UNHCR as well as other donor countries if they agree to it. So, but for now, they are exempted. It's only the ACC card holders that have been asked to go back. Nevertheless, there has been harassment of POR card holders as well, and there have been multiple, statements coming in from community heads that they are also being harassed. That's the first. But if you look at the, since we're talking of population dynamics and topographies in terms of migrant populations, post 2021, the largest chunk that has actually made it out of Afghanistan are non-Pashtun Afghans that actually came out of Afghanistan. And so it is affecting more the northern part if these populations will be sent back. What are the political implementations? Geostrategic implications are totally different. But obviously, this has little to do with Pashtun dynamics in terms of populations. Rather, it has to do more with how the repatriation plan took place and how the migration took place in first place. That's the first bit of it. The second bit in terms of the economic markers which you are mentioning, I totally agree. And this is a suggestion that has been put back um, again and again, that there should be an investment opportunity given to Afghans. They should be given the right to buy property. They should also be given the right for, livelihood within Pakistan. Um, and it's a suggestion that actually came to the table on multiple occasions. I've seen it myself coming in. And even at this time, when Ambassador Sadiq is in Afghanistan as the special representative for Pakistan, this suggestion is on the table. But basic problem, what Irfan has actually mentioned, and I agree with him, is that the premise in which Afghanistan is viewed, Afghanistan until now has had an unchanged perspective as a security space. It doesn't look like, it has human beings. It doesn't look like it has a diversified population. The only agenda that it actually serves is a space that can provide, geostrategic depth to either countries or either regional powers or either global powers. So unless Afghanistan is viewed from a humanitarian perspective, I don't see any of this happening anytime soon, unless, and it is for the Afghan people themselves also to, sort of create and speak about this particular issue, that this is not a country that is going to be used as proxy for any global or regional power, but it is an actual population that loves its own country and how it is. Also importantly, Naila, one of the deep anxieties of the Pakistani state has always been of India's influence in Afghanistan. And we've heard several unverified facts in recent years on how during the previous two regimes of Ashraf Ghani as well as Hamid Karzai, on how Afghanistan was used as a space to be used against Pakistan. But then again, the recent escalation between India and Pakistan, as well as the increase of diplomatic footprint of India into Afghanistan, is also a cause of Pakistani states anxiety in terms of how Afghanistan's space would be used against Pakistan, particularly when the country's major population believes that Pakistan was involved in a lot of whatever happened in Afghanistan for the worst of the Afghan population. So obviously all of this is part of this entire narrative. I'm not saying whether it's good or whether it's bad, but these things need to be kept into perspective when you look at state policies.
Thank you. Yes, there is a lot of resentment and animosity, and some of it's embedded in the policy and some of it's embedded in what the media puts forth. Now, is the Pakistani government's decision then to forcefully repatriate Afghan refugees a response to policy measures? Or is it actually then aimed at addressing terrorism, as the state says?
I personally think, if you're asking me, I personally think that it's a knee-jerk reaction to the rise of terrorism in Pakistan. Also, at the back of it, there is a larger economic motive, which we haven't had the time to talk about, but it's also the unilateral increase of tariffs from key products that Pakistan was importing from Afghanistan. And it also reflects, Islamabad's anxiety vis-a-vis Afghan policy of what it thought that the leverage it enjoyed on the Afghan Taliban, and which has not come as the way that they expected. So it's a knee-jerk reaction, and I think that it will be a bumpy ride. We might see a minor course correction here and there, but I don't see this relationship building up to a level of a very, very friendly neighborhood anytime soon.
Thank you for that. Also, Irfan, what role can civil society and the global community play in safeguarding the rights of these displaced populations now? What can we do moving forward?
If you are asking me, I think we are mainly responsible to our own states in some ways. Why I'm saying this? Because there is an issue. For example, if an Afghan civil society member stands up for any Pakistani or for Pashtun, my own state not only take this relationship suspiciously, rather, but goes to the criminal end. And same is true about India. For example, there is an India-Pakistan tension. And in most of the television interviews, when I come up, I have to make a narrative to show that I'm Pakistani first, and only then I have to comment something that I am against war and all these kind of things. So I think civil society or those people who don't use the lens of their respective states are in a very tight position. They have to use their power very calculatively. And how to connect with each other is really very important at this juncture, but not to antagonize each other's states, because on social media, on Twitter, and all those accounts, when we are using all these kind of things, somehow these avenues are being used by our own states in order to strangulate public opinion in their own land. For example, if there is a cricket match, and if any Afghan only raising one flag in a cricket match makes my state go for a knee-jerk reaction to punish all those Afghans, what I'm just trying to say, our role is very powerful as civil society, but at the same time, very tricky. We need to be critical, but we also need to be very responsible to understand what is the objective situation on the ground. Only then can we support each other instead of directly plunging headlong into those issues which are lurking behind us very visibly, viscerally, yet our jumping over there create a very nasty kind of situation. So on the one hand, I have this responsibility to stand up for Afghan, to help them in so many ways, but on the other hand, I understand the tricky position or the kind of critical position in which my own state is, which can punish me as well as punish Afghan in Islamabad. So this is something which I just wanted to bring into attention, that standing by each other, but at the same time very careful not to antagonize our respective states on social spaces, on social media, on Twitter, here, there. This is the role I think civil society can play. not to stay behind, be on the front, be critical, but also responsible.
Thank you. It is important to be responsible, especially now with all these humanitarian crises coming forward. And it's important, especially for journalists and the media, not to self-censor in spaces like this. Thank you so much for your time. And I really appreciate that you joined us today. Thank you again for joining us on this panel. We're working on various reports and panel discussions on minorities across South Asia at the center. We have an upcoming panel discussion on Elon Musk X, the amplification of Islamophobia in the UK. And we just released a report on radicalized grooming gangs and another on hate speech in India. We invite you all to join our mailing list and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, X, LinkedIn, and TikTok at CSOH. We regularly post on our upcoming events, reports, published pieces, and collaborations. For now, I'll take leave and again thank my guests, Iftikhar and Irfan, for your time and dedication to these issues.